sing since thou art laid down. No feller is come up against us. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the wrath by him for thee, all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up from their thrones all the
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing today in the book of Daniel, chapter 4. Let's get the mic in the right position. So let's continue and let's just dive right in. Nebuchadnezzar, we usually don't say Nebuchadnezzar, because it was first, I was going to pronounce it exceedingly well. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Nebuchadnezzar was at rest in mine house, and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them. But they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But at the last Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee, tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and the interpretation thereof. Thus were the visions of mine head upon my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew, and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof. And all flesh was fed of it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and an holy one came down from heaven, and cried aloud and said thus, Hew down the tree, cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. Hold on, pardon me 1 second here. Okay. All right. Verse 17. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and by the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. I really want to, hold on 1 second. Nothing less than actual tissue would do. So now we're good. So, stay there. I want you to, that's a note to give you peace. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof. For as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonied for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. I think so. The king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee, trouble thee. Belteshazzar answered and said, My lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt. I don't know why I said dwelf, but okay. Because it looks like an F, I get it. And upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king, that art grown and become strong. For thy greatness is grown, and reached unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. And whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven, and saying, Hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon my lord the king, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. And whereas thou commanded to leave the stump of the tree, whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee, after that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. All this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon, that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power, and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, saying, O king Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it was spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. And at the end of days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, And I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. And he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand, or say to him, What doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me. For the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me. And my counselors and my lords sought unto me. And I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. So we have the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar. Very interesting story. I find it's really rather perfect. Nebuchadnezzar, all these, he's impressed with God. But in many ways, he's also very much impressed with himself, because God can reveal secrets and stuff, but he does big things. He builds things. It's interesting. When Daniel, I want to point this out because this is, I think, a real key point for me. When he warns the king gets a whole year. I mean, I think kings don't deserve much, but the Lord is merciful. And Daniel, I think one of the key parts is, I know what it is, I just want to find the actual verse. But basically, break off thy sins. It's not, you've got to know the one God. It's very, the first thing you can do to bring yourself into alignment with God is break off your sins. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. God's kingdom is very near, much more near than you realize. Nebuchadnezzar, I often talk about how you die is important. In the next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar's gone. He's obviously passed away. So that happened to him. He was restored to his kingdom, and he died, like all men die. Why is this even meaningful? Because it matters how you end up. It does. If he had just died and lost his kingdom, that's what often happens to tyrannical rulers. I think I'm going to go with tyrannical rulers, but tyrants. I can say the word. Tyrants often meet a very sticky end. I mean, look what happened to Hitler. Didn't end well for the gentleman, all right? I call him that ironically, by the way, So anyways, so he calls Nebuchadnezzar to do good, to do right. Because, it's good to know God. And Nebuchadnezzar kind of knows and believes in God, in Daniel. It becomes very obvious from the thing. Like, you have the spirit of the holy gods. Now this thing about the watcher and the holy gods, we'll look into it. But I don't want you to get too terribly distracted by it. I know it comes up in the wisdom literature and other places, and also in the Apocrypha. But don't get too hung up on it. Because this is what the king sees. This is his interpretation thereof. Remember, this is all written in Chaldean, too. So it's like an idea. Now, remember, the word angel just means like a messenger. I mean, it's a descriptive title. So watcher is also kind of a descriptive title. It doesn't really give you a ton of insight into the heavenly operations of things. And honestly, those are the kind of things I generally take a pass on. Because, worshiping of angels, intruding into those things which you have not seen is a tricky bit of business. As far as it's very, when people start talking about orders of angels and this and stuff, I mean, I think it's an interesting subject, but this study is always about the core of our faith, and it's meant to build us up in our most holy faith, not with just an idea to tickle your ears with all the interesting things in the Bible, which there are many, and which there are many channels that will cover. I mean, there are plenty of channels that cover the sensational aspects. You want to hear about Nephilim? There's plenty of channels about Nephilim. You know what I mean? But what does it mean to us who truly believe? That's the question. He calls him to righteousness. Not that faith doesn't have a place, but the point is faith without works is dead. If you do not act on this belief, he is the king. He has so much power, and he sees this God, right? But like I talked about, in many ways, his conscience is hardened. He's been a hard man his whole life. He raised probably to be a warrior. He was a warrior king. He was a conqueror. He was not just like Belteshazzar, a sit back and feast. He was the one who built the empire. And so he had a lot of reason to be proud. I mean, just from what he saw. He was the one, as people have noted, being in charge. Now, you can screw it up a lot of ways. But getting there puts you in a position to have a lot of success that other people just have no shot at because they're not in that position. But also, of course, the other key line is he puts in that position the basest of men. Look who our president is. He is the basest of men. I mean, Donald Trump is a pretty base guy. He talks about grabbing women by their private parts. He talks about that. Though, do women let you do that? Oh, yeah, they let you do that sometimes. When you're a star, you don't even have to be a star. Sometimes the women, well, whatever. Point is, he is used to being the big highfalutin guy. He's filled with pride. But he's a base person. He didn't care about the poor. And I'm saying base, I like the last president. I think he had some shortfalls. I said, I'm very anti-pandemic. I don't like that he gave a presidential award to that, what do you call him? I don't want to say, it's not a war criminal. What is someone who's violated people's human rights? Or been instrumental in the violation of their rights. But I don't know how can I condemn Fauci and not include Trump? It seems like he's in charge. I'd still vote for him over the alternative, unless the alternative is palatable. I'll tell you, there's certain alternatives I would take on any side of the aisle. I used to vote for third party all the time, I there's some things I can't vote for. So I'll be thinking about that, Anyways, but it's a political thing. He sets base people. It's funny. Everything about the last president that people hated is also true of this president. He also does the whole grabbing thing. He's been, accused of the same things and been seen being creepy on camera. Because look have you ever needed a more key example? Sometimes the people who get in charge are great, but sometimes they really suck. Sometimes they're not good. They're the basest, the lowest of people. It's kind of like what God told Israel, because they're God's chosen people, right? But one of the things he said, don't think I chose you because you were the greatest people. Not because they're the worst either, but whatever, because I had pity on you, because I chose you, because of Abraham, of my faithfulness to my promise to him. That's why they're the chosen people. That's why they inherit, because God is faithful. If they're unfaithful, what if some of them fell? That doesn't make the promise of God of none effect. It's always had the possibility that, hey, Cain slew his brother Abel. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil and his brother's righteous. And that's an important part of it. When we know about God, our conscience needs to act on that. And that has to have a reflection in the way we treat other people. We can't just continue oppressing the poor and just doing whatever. And I've got my shield of faith. Nothing can hurt me. Satan, you can't accuse me of trampling the poor. I've got the shield of faith. You're going to find out that fake faith is worthless as a shield. It won't quench any of the fiery darts of the wicked. They're going to go right through that thing into your heart. Okay, so let's look at the verse by verse thing. But that part I just could not. I didn't want to wait on it. Peace be unto you. We always talk about how important it is to have peace, right? There's no peace that's greater than the peace that where you know you're obedient to God. Like I said, I don't have 100%, accuracy record myself, but the more obedient I am, the more peace I have. I notice that, and I can see the trend line. You see how that goes? Is the more obedient you are, the more good it is. It has nothing to do with how saved you are, because you're either saved or you're not. And that's by the grace of God. But now that you believe in him, now that you have the faith, so many things are open to you. You have power to become a son of God. So by all means, proceed. You know, Jesus said, I came to set fire in the world. What will I do if I already find it be kindled? Well, some people are out there kindling fires. And it starts with yourself. You know, if we can kindle a fire within ourselves, if we have not fire in us, how shall any fire be lit? You know, I say us because it's not dependent on any one of us. It's dependent on everyone. I don't like that, oh, whatever. Let's go on. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God had wrought toward me. How great they are his signs. How mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion from generation to generation. And I presume this is all agreed with an intense amount of skepticism for all. Probably never. I don't know. I believe it. This testimony feels true. It's written in Daniel's hand, no doubt. But, I don't think, Nebuchadnezzar was, he wasn't a man in the habit of writing things on his own, but he could dictate. I was at rest. I was flourishing. I had this dream. Now, I was just prospering and doing well. Everything was going great. I saw a dream which made me afraid. Because I think from the beginning, he doesn't understand the dream, but it's a troubling dream. He sees this big tree, right? Well, he brings in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans. We talked about this. This could be some sort of... I'm not sure about what the exact designation is, but it doesn't really matter, does it? Because they're all useless. You know what I mean? They're all useless, so it doesn't really matter what they do. If they look at horoscopes, I don't really think that's the same. Do I think astrology is, well, one, I don't think it's real. Two, I don't, is there harm in reading it, making it? I would avoid that stuff. Just because it is, as far as in that predicting for your personal life. If there's something interesting about I love constellations. I love the stars. I was looking to see if I have my astronomical calendar. Sorry, it's not astrological calendar. Astronomical calendar I got years ago. It's not really any good anymore because the planets are all in the wrong places. But it's good for the positions of the stars. And I like to look at the constellations and know a number of them and all that. And, when you think about, they are for signs and for seasons, and there can be something to that. But, again, when we intrude far into it, it's such a sketchy thing to interpret. How do you know? And what is it you know? You're looking for the kind of directions that, it's like I say about Jesus on the pinnacle of the temple. I don't need God's help to know I shouldn't jump. You know what I mean? And I don't need, and so with a lot of things, don't necessarily have to invoke God to know what I should do today. Not that I don't do things mindful of the Lord. What I mean is I have to go God, should I go buy shoes or should I make that trip to the DMV? What should I do? Maybe I'll check my horoscope to find out, stay away from the DMV. And so I don't think, again, they didn't have newspapers and, and such, but they had their wise men from different backgrounds and studies and schools of thought. From his he liked to capture wise people and bring them into his court. Not a bad idea, steal all that's how the Russians built their space program. They took all the German rocket scientists, a number of them anyways, and they had a lot of the German scientists, and so that's how they were able to, in spite of having the kind of economy that does not really spark innovation, they had people who were already well along in that study. The Germans were just very advanced in that at that time, especially propelled rockets. We had the A-bomb, but they had rockets. They were close to the bomb before, but they were defeated. So there you go. So he told him the dream, but then at last Daniel came, and whom is the spirit of the holy gods? Now, I'm according to the name of my God, and whom is the spirit of the holy gods? I'm curious between those two words, what's the difference? When he says my God, is he saying my Elohim? You know what I mean? Whereas the Spirit of the holy gods, the plural, which we usually just translate God with a capital G in the King James, like when it refers to God. But I think they rightly do it because he would have said it plural. Let's see. Okay. Let me see. Belteshazzar. Oh, I'm on the wrong verse. Name of my God is what? What is it? He uses this. Oh, man, really? Well, it's the same word in every occasion, but maybe it's a different form. I don't know. We can maybe look at the Brown Driver Briggs here because it'll tell us what are the two verses. They're the same verse. So it's Daniel. God in general, God of Israel. But anyways, it's Elah. It's not like you. It corresponds. Eloah. It corresponds to Eloah, which is still not the normal Elohim you would expect for the name of God. Eloah, shortened. It means God. What's the heathen God used in the ancient poems? Probably a prolonged form of El, like an emphatic. Yeah, because Elohim, El is the shortened version of that. And Aloha is like Elohim without the plural on the end. Now, I don't usually would say Elohim, or if there is some version of that, I don't know. It's usually translated God 74 times. And God, small g, 6 times God's 15. So it doesn't matter much because Nebuchadnezzar is a heathen, and so he doesn't know God. He reverences God through Daniel. This is Christ whom Paul preacheth. Sort of situation. It's God whom Daniel serves. Your God. He understands and honors many gods, but he does sort of have the sense that Daniel has access to sort of an ultimate God, a God who is kind of, he calls him God of gods and all that. I think even already he acknowledged his God as being, this is an unusual God that Daniel follows after. Paul made the same thing known to the Greeks. In our time, this whole gods thing is different because people are in the opposite direction of being just radically skeptical. But they still fall prey to all kinds of things that are essentially the equivalent of idolatry. It's like another kind of religion, another kind of ethics. And I hate using the word woke because it's not a good word. Because it basically originally meant to be enlightened, right? And along the line, especially with regard to the oppression of African Americans. It meant like, in this country, it meant like to be aware that it still goes on, and I don't, I'm not saying it doesn't, as far as, but it is rare. Obviously, it's not, because it used to be quite common. Okay, quite common. Now it is rare. It doesn't not exist, but it's nothing compared. I was watching this video, and I recommend this. Well, I don't recommend it exactly. There's a channel called On the Edge with Andrew Gold, and it interviews a woman who does work with orphans in Haiti and has for 30 years. She can tell you about the piles of dead children that from the harvested organs, black children in a country where the Clinton Foundation collected millions of dollars to look after the poor, and they're not being looked after. Their organs are being harvested and have been for years. The children of the poor, the disabled, the crippled. It's absolutely abhorrent. And then in this country, they under the banner of saying that such lives matter. They raised millions of dollars and bought themselves, sex change operations and mansions. What about you don't think those people are going to meet sticky ends in the Lord with the Lord? As far as you can, they may die. Like the psalmist says, they seem to, they live out their lives in peace. But they never turn from their wicked ways. And it's like, and they are forever, therefore, lost. You know? When people refuse to turn. Nebuchadnezzar, this is great. This is the grace of God in action, because it usually comes it doesn't always come with such a nice. You know, a lot of people go through rough experiences before they turn to God. For me, it was no different. I went through a series of, every time God acted in my life, I was at a pretty low spot. You know, it was a pretty rough place. You know, the Lord must sense when it's like, when indeed you are close to breaking, if he indeed wants to do something about it. Anyways, it makes me think, because we're talking about kings, it makes me think of politics. God's kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, his dominion from generation to generation. But there was you'll find out that interview. It was, I forgot what the name it was. It was about, I forgot the title of the video, but it was with a woman named Susie something or other. I don't recommend, there's no disturbing images, but you will hear disturbing things. What they're doing to children, something like that. You look at that channel, you'll find them. It's about Haiti and all that. It's not in the titles, though. But, you know, I know it exists. That's what woke meant. You know, to be aware. I'm woke about a lot of things, you know. I mean, as far as I understand, I'm aware. It means to be enlightened into things that people are just blissfully unaware of. All right? And so, now when we call people that, it's like ironic. Like when you say, oh, it's woke. And I did it myself. I'm refraining from it now because we need a better word. Because it's no good to, you know, time and time again, we always get labeled nasty things. You know what I mean? They falsely call us so many things. You know, as it be reported. I'm trying to say, as it be reported that we say, you know, libelously reported, I think was the word, or or the idea of a false accusation. We're sometimes falsely accused. Well, you know, when you call someone woke, you're just sort of mocking their idea that they are enlightened. But there's something, you know, there's some better way to approach that. I haven't thought of it yet. But, you know, it's the mindset of Sodom is more like what I would consider it. It's that all-encompassing totalitarian, we will know you, and you will reveal yourself to us, and you will expose yourself and allow us to do whatever we want with you, because we own you. You will own nothing, and be happy because your masters say that's how you should be. Yeah. So, you know, the king exclaims how great the signs and wonders of God are. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, his dominion from generation to generation. Because kings come and go, but God abideth forever. This is a realization he has. It's not something, you know, again, he just thinks in terms of the gods and warfare in the world and just the way as he has experienced it so far. You know, he knows how the world works. How many people think, I know how the world works. I can, you know, I do this with my hands. Not every man, you know, Elon Musk doesn't necessarily get the benefit of this, or, you know, I mean, no, not to rip on the guy or anything, but like, you know what I mean? Not every man who ascends to a position of power necessarily gets, and I'm not saying that guy needs it more than anybody else. I'm just saying people in power don't always get their moment of clarity to be truly awakened to the reality. See, that's what I don't like when you talk about enlightened, you know, it's like, just like when people called us Christians, it didn't really work. You know, I mean, it was like flattery. You know, it's like, oh, little Christians. It's like, we were like, oh, you call us after the name of our Lord? Because they won't shut up about Christ. So he brings in all the wise men. I must have skipped back accidentally. So he brings in Belteshazzar, Daniel, you know. I know, he's had great experience with Daniel. And the 3 Hebrew children. You know, he's already commanded, nobody blasphemes the God of Daniel. And he's like, you know, but he's going on through his life being a king like he always was. I mean, you know, anyone speaks a word against the king, God of Daniel, let him be torn in pieces and his house is made of dunghill. You know what I mean? And again, like I said, it's like if you're not in line with everything, then you're out. If you don't believe like we believe, you're out. But never mind how you behave. I think it's funny that there's, like I said, I look at these churches. Oh, they're so faithful to interpreting Genesis in a literal wooden way, but completely blind to the fact that they have rampant fornication going on in the midst of the church. That's in your holy meetings. I say, Mike, divorce is not an unforgivable sin. It's funny, the Catholics are always like, you can't get divorced. It's like, you can't murder. You can't steal. You can't get divorced. But sometimes people do. That's all there is to it. That's why I look at it. It's like, just like a lot of sins. Yeah, you're not allowed to do it, right? Just like a lot, just like a lot of things. God intended that they should never part. That's why you should fight like hell to save your marriage. Always. If you're a Christian, especially if you're married to another Christian, you got to work that out. Especially when you both have sincerely held beliefs. And then I can't imagine how you couldn't work it out. So in the dream, he sees the tree. He describes his dream, right? We see this big tree. Now, my mind immediately started thinking of things like Ezekiel chapter 31. Where behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon. And his brand, very similar, because it's not to say, well, this is Nebuchadnezzar. It's like, yeah, it's all the same. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's not the same, but they're connected. And there's a similarity in the tree analogy here. Not so much with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil directly. There's like an indirect, I think there's sort of an indirect hint at that. Because if Christ is represented by the tree of life, if we take that position, which I do, then the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if not representing Satan, Satan is certainly the advocate of that tree. I mean, that's inarguable, right? He's the one who advocates for the consumption of that in the disobedience. He seeketh whom he may devour. He goes about seeking. How does he devour you? By convincing you to violate your conscience and disobey God. Because you know God. You know him in there. So you don't know him as God and have not honored him as God as we ought. This is in our ignorance, of course. Now we do because we know. But we didn't because we knew not. But once we know God, we must honor him as God and have to face and confront the reality of our sin. And of course, the thankful thing is Jesus has died and paid the awful price for our sin. It is an awful price because it's like our violation of what we were. Hey, I turned my back on you for just a moment, and you guys turn everything to garbage. You fill the world with violence, murder, deceit, perversity. What do we expect? We should expect nothing less than a flood of waters. If God had not promised to never do such a thing again. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven. And the sight thereof to the end of all the earth, this giant tree. The idea is that and of course, because Nebuchadnezzar really thinks a lot of himself. So he's portrayed as like this exalted tree. This high tree. Tall and strong. Also remember, like Jesus, you can meditate on that comparison to the parable of the mustard seed. Only because it somewhat is similar to this in describing the animals all lodging in it. The birds, especially, right? Do we have birds mentioned? The fowls of heaven, right? Yeah. And the beasts of the field. Well, when I talked about the fowls of heaven in the parable of the mustard seed, I was portrayed them as a sort of a dark influence. But I do relate them to the astrologers, the magicians, and the Chaldeans, and the wise men of Babylon. They are in this parable like those birds, lodging in the branches. That's why he says, when he was returned to his kingdom, his counselors returned unto him. All the things he lost returned unto them. And I think we could probably symbolically link a lot of stuff, and we're going to try to do that right now. Okay. So, yeah, so it says the leaves were fair, the fruit thereof much. It's a fruitful kingdom, riches. People are being fed and prospering under the kingdom of Babylon. And in it was meat for all, food for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it. That's like the beast of the field represents, I think in some way, just like in the dream of Pharaoh, like some sort of agriculture. The cattle, the herdmen, the beasts of the field, the men laboring in the fields, the men laboring in the vineyards, the average people. They prospered. Right? The beasts said they were in the fowls of the heaven, the high flying ones, the guys in the ivory tower, the Chaldeans, the magicians, the advisors, the soothsayers, the astrologers. Those are represented by the birds. And that's why I say when the birds come to the tree in the parable of the mustard seed, that's a hint at all what we have with the infiltration of unbelievers and perverts into the clergy, both in the Catholic Church and in all kinds of churches. Positions of trust and religious authority are an attraction to some of the worst people, unfortunately. Just like some of the basest people are attracted to the power of being a king, so also some of the basest people are drawn into the power of being over the church. Now, one thing with the king, God sets whom he will, but in the church, he has given us authority to bind and to loose and to kick people out. It's already in the New Testament. When they grossly violate, if someone, what's grossly violate? Fornicating, oppressing the poor, actively being dishonest or crooked in significant ways that hurt people, and unrepentantly so. It's one thing when you confront someone with their sins and they say, "You're right, brother. I need to do the right thing." And you say, "Well, then, I love you, brother. And hugs all around, and I forgive you, and you're forgiven. Go in peace and sin no more." And if they do again, as long as they continue to, and not paying lip service, but sincerely try, I know that it can be very difficult to eradicate all sin. Most people don't believe you could get rid of all sin, and I understand. I think that's basically unbelievable, except I believe all things are possible through Jesus. And so I know that ultimately, we will be free from sin. Nobody believes we're still going to be sinning in the kingdom of God. And I would say, why should it be such a wham bam transition? Like one day I was just sinning, and the next day I found myself in heaven and righteous. I definitely think that since I'm alive for all this time, it would be kind of rude to Jesus, my Lord, who saved me, to not take seriously all the things he said and all the things written in the book he consistently pointed to as the source of wisdom and the source of godly knowledge, which is the Bible, the Old Testament, and of course the New, which he wouldn't be pointing to, but implicitly because that's from where we derive our understanding of him. We must include that if we're going to talk about Jesus. So it had food for all, meat for all. Notice that fruit is called meat, and that's not because that word doesn't mean meat, but figuratively it means all. It just means food. And actually, if it does in Hebrew not mean meat, it's because in King James that's how they let's sit at meat, because meat is usually a significant part of any kind of meal. Like if you're going to sit down to eat, meat might be involved. And so frequently, like pick bread is another one, where it's a figure of speech where all the food that is consumed is reduced down to the one. It's a figure of speech. Sorry, a bit of my... All right, where we go? Okay, I forgot about the watcher. Well, it means a wakeful one. A waking or wakeful one. It only occurs in Daniel. Of course, let's look about the Hebrew one. In Deuteronomy, it's a little different though. It's used as a verb here. Awake, Deborah. Awake, awake, awake. Yeah, that's a verb. He lifted, he swung his spear, he wakened his spear. That's, he wakened his spear. Because that means, again, that's a figure of speech. They say wake, but they mean he used it. He woke up his spear. Get up, sword, awake! Time to battle! Talk to it like it's a living thing. They use figures of speech like we do, maybe even more so. That's why you have to be careful. Taking everything too literally. Of Israel stirred up the spirit, because it means to awaken, like from sleep. He lifted up his spear. Really with spear a lot, it means to you awaken he swung his spear. The Lord stirred up against. And to wake also means when something's at rest, to go from being at rest to being in motion. That's what this means. Okay? One that is moved. Now, that's what this word, the Hebrew word means, which is only used rarely as, in fact, on the left side here, okay, we have a few instances of it being used as a noun, I believe. Unless, I don't understand what nifal means. I thought that meant a noun. That's way down in Nehemiah. It's not even here? Psalms? 80, maybe all 80 occurrences aren't right here. That's all right. We don't need to see them all. Anyways, it is used masculine, singular, consecutive. Isaiah 10:26. That'd be a passage I'd be pretty familiar with. What's it translated there? See, this is now the... this is like how a Green's interlinear works. You have to read it from right to left while reading left to right. So it reads like, and will stir up for him, Yahweh of hosts, a scourge, like the slaughter of Midian at the rock of Oreb. And as his rod was upon the sea, shall he lift it up. So lift it up. Wait, what's the word that it's translated? I got to go back. All right, we just got to see what the translations are. There are a lot of... Most of them definitely do not seem the same as this idea of the watcher, but it's through the idea of an opening of the eyes to wake. Rather identical with ur, to be exposed or bare. So when he says a watcher here, it's again, we sometimes overbear it, but it's an observer of some sort. One who observes. So, I mean, perhaps, now again, for him, see again, can I say, is it right to say like, well, observers are God's observers who observe us and God sends them to observe or whatever. I just made that, word salad definition just for a little example. Is this description that Nebuchadnezzar gives a divine revelation of the nature of what he saw, or is it his rough approximation of what he thinks he was encountering? You know what I mean? He calls it a watcher, a Chaldean word for what? For angels that watch over you or something. I don't know. Or demons that watch over, or some category of divine being, or a category of supernatural being. I don't know. But it's probably being drawn from his mythology, what he calls it. Just like, we would describe things we saw that were unusual, that we don't have words for in the words we have. In our language. Something like an angel. Maybe it's something nothing like an angel. Like if I called something like an angel, but it was really, something else. So, I didn't look up the word meat in verse 12. I'm sure you guys all believe me, so I don't know what I'm doing anyways, but I just was curious. I'm not going to bring up the full definition. The word means food in Hebrew, mazon. But the King James translates it meat because in English, at the time the King James was translated, meat was just meant all food. Not that it didn't mean meat. It meant, because of the idiomatic usage, it means all foods. All right. The beasts of the field and the shadow, the fowls of the heaven. We talked about that. A watcher and a holy one came down from heaven. Holy one is going to be, well, I'm thinking in Greek, actually. I was like, hagnos. But actually, in Hebrew, a watcher is the ear, waking and wakeful one. Holy one, Kaddish. Kadosh is like Kaddish. You ever heard the word kosher? It's not, I think it's derived from something similar. No, it's Ilah. Sorry, I got too many windows open. There we go. Kaddish. Kaddish means holy. Spirit of the holy gods. And it's used a lot in Daniel. 13 occurrences. It's a word, well, because this is the Chaldean word. It will correspond to a Hebrew word, and that kadosh, yeah. Kaddish, yeah. Kodesh, from the same as Kodesh. Consecrated, holy, holy one. And this is the regular word for holy, as you see. Much like saints. Now, does that mean he saw a New Testament saint travel back in time like John and deliver this message? Does he have an understanding of what a saint is, as the Christians would conceive of it? Of course not. He has his Babylonian conception of what that is, and so he describes what he sees in those terms. But we could speculate that it is something like a saint or a whatever, or like I said, angels are holy ones. They also are considered holy ones like the saints, especially in the Old Testament. So it talks about the Lord and his holy ones. It usually would refer to, maybe some people would argue it refers to passed on souls of people, I don't know. Again, you'd have to specify. He doesn't specify. He sees the two figures, much like Abraham had the two men come to him at night on the way to Sodom, who blessed him and all that, right? So he sees this tree with just all this activity, all this stuff, and then he sees the vision of these two beings coming down from heaven. And the reason he probably described them as a watcher and a holy one is because they were obviously not human. They were some sort of divine being. They were some kind of individual. That's clear. Because a watcher and a holy one, when they describe that, that is some sort of angelic or divine being that has taken shape as a man, but still exhibits the properties of the angelic, such as being compassed about with brightness or having a certain appearance. There's always something about them. I think because they perhaps appear to be almost perfect humans, like too perfect. Like if you saw an angel, they would seem too perfect, without any sort of blemishes or the normal things you would expect to see in a person, like wrinkles and age and all that. Because even young people show age or scars and things. There's like ways of telling them. But they would seem young but way too old at the same time, I would suppose. So these two messengers come down from heaven. And he cried aloud. One or both as one? I don't know. He cried aloud. Maybe he didn't know which one. A watcher and a holy one. Maybe the holy one cried. Cut down the tree, cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it and the fowls from his branches. He said, nevertheless, leave the stump of the roots, even with a band of iron and brass. I think that iron band implies to prevent it from growing for some time. And let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Like, why would you leave the stump with a band of iron and brass? Because I think that has to do with the fact of 7 times. Because if you cut down a tree, it will immediately, if not next week, but by the next season, it will shoot up all kinds of branches. I cut down a tree last year, and it immediately the stump shot up all kinds of stuff. Because now you have this giant tree with all the root system providing, it doesn't have to support anything. So it just starts shooting and growing like crazy because it needs sunlight for all that root system to stay alive. I suppose. I mean, if you keep a tree from sprouting any leaves, it will die. So, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass. I think that refers to the 7 times that it had passed him. He had to be sort of bound in this position, not allowed to regenerate. It's not just a hit, it's like a prolonged sentence. Let his portion be with the beasts and the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from a man, and let a beast's heart be given unto him. And let 7 times pass over him. I often wonder if this isn't the source of people's thought that like a person can be so affected mentally. And there are documented cases of people having lost their minds, their sanity. And so the idea of insanity passing on to Nebuchadnezzar, this story sounds utterly believable, the sort of thing that could happen to a man, certainly. And also the kind of characteristic work the Lord does do. His mercy is tender and kind, but also could be regarded as hard. But only if you don't compare it to the alternative. Because it's not enough for you to just have mercy. You have to have the same qualities to exist in the world of God, that you are merciful. He doesn't want unmerciful, implacable beings inhabiting his forever. That's why we're all bound in time. It's like, it's not tryouts exactly. It's more like training camp. You know? And I don't know my destiny, but I'm going to pursue the best destiny I can imagine. And that's with Christ. He's the one who can reward. He's the one who gives true riches. That's what I want. I want true riches. I never even make any bones about, I don't apologize for my ambition in God. But my ambition is not to become big with you. Though sometimes that can be a consequence of the Lord's gifts that a lot of people start listening to you, right? But that's not my goal. And it's like, I can get that too if that's what God wants. You know, and that's what he says. It's like, you know, if you forsake all for my sake, you will have family and houses added to you hundredfold. You know what I mean? And to me, that's, you know, obviously in the church, you can have quite a family of supporters, you know. But if your goal is to gain supporters, you're more likely to end up like, maybe not so much like Nebuchadnezzar, but more like Belteshazzar. Okay? The next, not Belteshazzar, that's Daniel. More like Belshazzar. Yeah, there's no T. It's very important that T-E. I already forgot what it meant, but it's not equivalent. Daniel is wise. Okay, so, I can't believe we're almost out of time. I don't want to stop. This is a good study. Okay, and so they say bind it. Let him be wet, you know, till 7 times pass over him. Let him be driven insane and live this life. You know, and we don't think about it. It's like, you know, like I do think about it. You know, I think about, what if I was suddenly retarded? I know that word isn't really like something that's in vogue today. I don't know. Mentally disabled in some way or the other. You know, I know not suddenly become Down syndrome. That would be a miracle, a weird one, but and a devastating one, more like a plague. You know, from someone who did not have that at birth. It would be strange to be suddenly turned into that. But a lot of times people get traumatic brain injuries, you know, and you lose your mind, and some people never get it back. You say, I don't want that to happen to me. You know, but it could. You know, I'm mindful of that. Things like that can happen. You know, I value the mind that God has given me, and you know, want to put it to good use. You know, exercise, have your senses exercised to discern both good and evil. So we can not be like beasts. You know, beasts are uncouth. You know? And in some ways, God is saying to Nebuchadnezzar, you are no better than a beast to me, the way you behave. And of course, first thing, I skipped ahead a bit, because I'm not sure we're going to pick it up tomorrow. But because I realized I skipped down. And I'm not doing a good job of going verse by verse here, so we're going to have to comb through it a little bit. And so make sure I don't miss any key points. But one of the things he said, okay, let this 17, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basis of men. Because you're not there. You may be really good at what you do, but that's not why you're there. You know, people think I'm where I am because I've done all, I earned it. What about the guy next to you who didn't earn it? Yeah, I mean, who's incompetent at his job, but still seems to retain it. What about him? Did he earn it? You know, and you say, well, you say I earned it because I'm worthy of it, because I'm in it and doing a good job. I don't deny this. But the point is, you can lose it. You can be like one of those guys that you can be turned into one of those people that are unworthy of it. You can lose your mind. You got to remember where all blessings come from. It rains on the just and the unjust, and the crippling wounds come to all men, especially those that do not fear God, especially if he has any mercy for us. I'm thankful for the arrows of the Lord, because his wounds are faithful are the wounds of a friend, and God has been nothing but a friend to me. This dream I have seen, and he tells Daniel, declare me the interpretation. The wise men of the kingdom were not able to make known to me, but you are able. For the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. And then Daniel was astonished. I think it's probably we're going to have to pick up. I have things to say about this, but we're at an hour, so I'll just save those thoughts. There's nothing, it's not like I'm going to lose them because they're not going away. What Daniel says here, because I'm going to have to address it. So we'll begin at verse 19. If there's any little thing we missed in the first half of it, we'll get it then. I think this chapter is definitely worth at least 2 days. It's really fascinating, kind of beautiful too. I've always been a fan of this chapter. I remember I thought about making it into a song at some point. It may be someday, God willing. All right, so we'll be back tomorrow, God willing. And until then, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you tomorrow.
The whole earth is at rest and it's quiet. They break forth into singing. Yeah, the fir trees rejoice at thee. The cedars of Lebanon sing. Since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the wrath by him for thee, all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up